Next up, we have Bob Stein, who just have to plug his computer in. Do you want to use this or not?
Excuse me, I thought I was going on this afternoon, so I'm sort of going to be a little bit more extemporaneous than even
There was a break after this, so sorry about the timing.
than even usual.
Yeah.
I cannot resist saying this. I'm very fascinated by the age range in this room. I don't think I've been at a meeting relative to the future of anything in the last many, many years where the median age, it looks like, is over 50, right?
That's over 15, you said.
And I'm afraid it does say something about the future of text. And interestingly, I'm of the mind that the future of text, we really can't imagine. It's going to take a long time for that to develop. I'm fond of an anecdote. I was giving a talk in Mexico City once, and I said something, and this guy raised his hand, and he said, "Did you know that it took over 50 years for page numbers to appear in printed books after Gutenberg perfected the technology?" And there are reasons why it took, a lot of reasons why it took 50 years, but when you think about it, if it took humans that long to figure out that page numbers would be handy, and it took 150 years for the novel to emerge, right? Cervantes pretty much regarded as the first, quote, novel. 150 years it took. So I figure that the future of text is not even something we can imagine. I'm pretty sure it's being invented in the game industry, not in the New York City or London publishing worlds. And I think a lot of my work, which sort of has spanned the last 35 years, and there was a lot of interactive multimedia at some point. But the real heart of my work has really not been so much about the future of text, but how do we take the past of text with us into the future, which honestly is not a very sexy thing to most people. Nobody really wants to fund it. It doesn't really seem like it's of so much value. Uh, there's another side point to this, which is that having spent 20 years trying to understand what it means to expand the notion of the page to include audio and video, I sort of 10 years ago was very fortunate, and somebody gave me a whole lot of money to sort of think about the future. And I hired a lot of young people. And what we started experimenting and came up with this idea that way more interesting than adding interactivity or audio and video to a page was adding people to the page. And I think it was Sam probably, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't necessarily mean for this to be up here. So I think Sam was who mentioned thinking processor. And I think that what my group and I have built over the last several years is what I call fundamentally a collaborative thinking processor. It turns out that when people can gather together in a margin, that they can think together. I'll show you some examples quickly. Let me see. I don't need that mouse. I need my mouse. Actually, I'll tell you a great story. There's a teacher in New York who 4 years ago, when we first gave her this technology, had all of her students, she teaches Spanish literature, and she had all her students read all their homework in what we call social book. And after 2 years, she retires, or she announces she's retiring, and there are 3 students left from the beginning who are going to be seniors in the next year. And they go to her and they say, Senora Gaitan, you can't retire because we had always been thinking we would read Don Quixote with you in social book. So the school agrees. She says, okay. The school lets her come back to teach one more class. The students take a class with her. And these 3 students put over 6,000 comments into the margin of Don Quixote when they read together. And I did a lot of interviewing with them afterwards. And what's most interesting about the way they describe the experience was they talk about how we helped each other understand this text. We helped each other get to insights that we never would have gotten to on our own. I mentioned last night, Alan Kay's dictum of point of view is worth 80 IQ points. We see that over and over again when people read together. I can show you one. Let me see one. That one, no, this one. You just get these lively conversations taking place up here, and I don't read Spanish, and this probably isn't one of those, but, one person will say something, the next person will say, yeah, that's interesting, what about this? And then the third person will come to a conclusion that none of them would have come to on their own. And it's just very exciting to see it. I'm going to point out really quickly that, where is it? What happened to Pedro? We'll do it. Okay, here we go, Pedro. Coming from the movie world, I always assumed that if we were going to build a reading platform, that it would have to include movies. So Social Book actually can take sort of full-length movies, and no, don't translate, and do play. And at any point in the time code, you can put comments in here. And we find, people having the same kinds of complex conversations in the margin of a film that they have in the margin of a text. One of the problems that we really tried to wrestle with was when three of us in this room have a conversation together and we know each other, huge amount of respect, huge amount of interest, very, very high signal-to-noise ratio. If, however, we want to get access to the crowd where there may be some insights, but there's mostly noise, the question is, how do you protect the private conversation, but yet give access to the broader conversation? And here's an example of that. This is Moore's Utopia that I'm reading by myself. But if I switch into the community mode, I'm suddenly seeing comments from all over the world. And these can be ranked and sorted and things like that. And I don't know if I'll find one here. But, I can join this conversation here if I want. And I don't think this, whoever that is, knows the person above her, but she was fascinated by the comment and got involved with it. I couldn't be more positive of anything than that media consumption of all types is going social. The idea that that reading is something you do by yourself, watching a movie is something you do by yourself, playing a game is something you do by yourself, it just 50 years from now will seem like the most arcane, antique concepts to our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. It's just going the other way. I'll tell you one last quick story. One of the three students, after they read Don Quixote together, they had to do a senior project. And her project, she wanted to read Bolaño's 666. And she said to her teacher, I want to read 666, but I don't want to do it in Social Book, because honestly, it takes a huge amount of work to read this closely. And so the teacher said, okay. And so she went and she started reading Bolaño on her own. And then about a week later, she comes back to the teacher and she said, oh my God, was that a mistake? She said, I'm in this book and you're not there. She said, I'm lost, suddenly. So it was so easy for her to have gotten to that point where reading with other people had become sort of the baseline. That was what she was becoming used to. And I find a lot now that if I have I'm always sending friends, things in Social Book because I want to read them with them. I'm not that successful all the time because it's a much bigger behavioral shift than many of us realize. Getting people to commit to reading together is not a trivial exercise. But that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It just means it's going to take a while longer. Anyway, thank you.
begins on schedule. Questions, please? I'll plug your name and take this away.
Not one.
Everybody's deep in thought. No, there will be.
Hi.
One is the success of the Kindle, which simply carries the page of the book forward. I mean, your great experiments from my youth, speaking of when we once were young, completely missed the commercial mainstream of just replicating the past, just bringing the past forward. And then the second thing is just that the social book, not reading alone, suggests something that's out of Aldous Huxley or the end of dissent and nonconformity. And so you worry a bit about young people that already are quite herd-like because they're constantly checking each other and I bought this pair of shoes. And so when they're reading these comments, they're being influenced by them. So as a teacher of undergraduates now, that's exactly what I don't want. There's a time for them to communicate with one another about what they've read. It's not as they're reading it. So there's a couple of questions that did we not anticipate that just simply carrying the past of the text forward, which is what you said, actually has had a lot of influence over what succeeded. And then second, how do you deal with nonconformists?
To me, the nonconformist question is a print era perspective. In other words, the idea that what's valuable is what you yourself contribute, as opposed to what a group can contribute, to me is from the past. I place no value any longer in individual effort. What I'm interested in is collaborative effort. But all of us in this room, we were all educated in a universe where we were given A's, B's, and C's based on what we did personally. And I'm much more interested in giving kids grades based on what they do collectively. And I'm not so much worried about conformity. Conformity happens when there isn't conversation between. But when you have conversation between people, you don't get to conformity, you get to synthesis. And you generally, I think, get to a better synthesis.
Yeah, thank you. I got that there's a continuum, like some of the early example of the people reading the Cervantes. They pre-existed as a community, as a class, and then at the other extreme, there's these people coming in from around the globe, and it strikes me there's a huge territory in there that's underarticulated in terms of permission, desirability. The other funny image that came to me was Tinder for text. But I think we need to have some real creativity here in terms of figuring out how to nurture the community that's reading together, and then also how to, like you say, protect it, not close it off completely, but not make it so anybody can just come crashing in.
These are good problems.
Yeah,
good problems. These are interesting ones to try to figure out. I will tell you, by the way, the last experiment we did before we started building this was we had 7 women who didn't know each other, who were distributed across 9 time zones. They read Doris Lessing's The Golden Notebook together and had a fabulous time. And it was a closed group. It was open to the public. It was a spectator sport. Anybody could watch their conversation, but they were the only ones who could actually comment on the page, and it worked sort of perfectly.
With social book, can you set a text so that the individual has to comment before they see the other comments?
Theoretically, you could. We haven't ever instituted that. I totally get the value in that, and it should be. I think teachers often want that, and it would be fine for me. If social book were actually a commercial operation, we would do that in a heartbeat.
I tried to do that with students, and they liked annotating texts together, but I wanted it so that they could see what it was that they annotated without looking at each other, at the same time.
It's interesting. The bigger problem is getting kids to actually respond to each other. There was this genius teacher in Oregon. It was her first time she'd ever taught, and she found Social Book, and she had her kids read Moore's Utopia. And what she set a rule in the class was that for every comment you make, you have to respond to 4 others. And that turned out to be very useful. Yeah, Sam.
I'm curious how widely these experiments have been conducted, and this is just a pointed question. Has the Quran, for example, been the focus of one of these social groups?
I don't know, because a lot of what happens in Social Book is private. My guess is not. I mean, this is something that we started building this 5 years ago, and it's never been released. So if people hear, I mean, very few, if somehow you hear about it and you start to play with it, then you do. But it's not I would say the usage is fairly limited.